Hey, what's up? Welcome back to the Less Invasive Podcast, your source for minimally invasive surgery and robotics and other assistive technologies for the operating room and radiology environment. If you haven't done already, make sure to subscribe and rate the podcast 5 stars. I'm your host, Lucien Blondel, co-founder and CTO of Quantum Surgical, a startup commercializing the Ep11 robot for percutaneous tumor ablation. I bring to the table 20 years of experience in imaging and robotics in various specialties, orthopedics, neurosurgery, spine surgery, interventional radiology, and interventional oncology. Today, I'm super happy to have Anne Osdoit on the show. Anne is the CEO of a medtech startup called Moon Surgical. Moon is developing a robot for laparoscopy procedure called Maestro, and is also a VC partner at Sofinnova, a Paris-based VC firm, where she's in charge of a medtech acceleration fund. And we'll talk about Maestro and VC. She, prior to Moon, she also led a couple of medtech startups created and seed funded by MD Start, and she held roles in marketing and clinical affairs in the medtech space. Anne, thank you very much for making time for me. How are you today?
I'm great. Hi, Lucien. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so I'm very curious, like the audience that shared a lot of questions about the Maestro system, but we'll start with a couple of questions about yourself. Can you briefly introduce yourself? What's your background and what has been your experience in the medtech space?
Sure. So I'm Anne. I'm 41. I'm based in Paris. I'm the mother of 4 children, and I have a passion for medical devices. I always dreamed of being a clinician as a child. I didn't go down that path for different reasons, but I always wanted to work with clinicians and really try to contribute in a way to better care for patients. I did engineering studies and found that there was a way to basically go back to that original goal by working in the medical device industry. So I've been an operator in the medical device industry for the past 20 years, working in startups, and being the first resource recruited beyond R&D. Basically, that was my first job at Mauna Kea Technologies, working on first regulatory approvals, first clinical trials, first product demos, anything that was not R&D pretty much for a few years. I then focused on clinical affairs, as you said, and developed a small team focusing on clinical studies. Did some additional training there because it's a very specific field. And then as the company grew, still at Mauna Kea, was in charge of marketing and some business development aspects. And after that, I met Antoine Papiernik, who was the managing partner at Sofinnova Partners, and he had started with a few other people a few years before an entity called MD Start, which really had a mission of identifying disruptive medtech projects, usually coming out of hospitals and clinicians, and turning them into startup companies, and basically, bridging the gap between the concepts in the hospital and developing products and getting them into the clinic. And Antoine needed someone to champion that project, to raise more money for it, to develop it, to stabilize the model, etc. So that's what I did for a few years. And as part of MD Start, I was the founding CEO of a number of our portfolio companies.
Okay, which areas, which specialties were these companies in?
In the areas of colorectal surgery, and surgery and digestive surgery specifically is an area I know well. I had also done some work in this area back at Mauna Kea Technologies. I was also the CEO of a company called Ablacare, then now called Mayhealth, in the field of infertility, female infertility.
Okay.
And I was also the founding company of Gradient Denervation Technologies, which is in the field of pulmonary hypertension.
Okay, great. That's a pretty rich background, and I understand that all this early experience in early stage medtech company like Monarchia Technologies prepared you to be a CEO and do due diligence in the surgical space. So, moving on to a more personal question: is there someone who is inspiring you today, or who has been inspiring you, and why?
There is someone who I consider to be my mentor, and I have the luck and the pleasure of working with him on a very regular basis. His name is Gérard Asquette.
Okay.
He is one of the founders behind MD Start. He is today a venture partner at MD Start, and he is probably the first serial medtech entrepreneur in France. Started creating his first startup companies in the early 80s and created 3 of them, and they were all acquired, and then gradually became an angel investor and became very close with Sofinnova partners. He has a lot of wisdom.
Okay.
And he is extremely kind and cares for people, but also very strategic. And he's a great inspiration. I would love to, ultimately be, a same leader as he has been.
Okay. Cool.
And I want to add something, which is that
Yeah.
I also get a lot of inspiration from the people I hire and work with. We have an exceptional team, both at Moon Surgical and at MD Start, and you learn a lot of things from the people you hire as well.
Yeah.
They might be more junior or more expert in certain, fields, but I think they always bring something in terms of, how they behave or their own leadership to yourself. So there's a lot of people who inspire me
All
on
right.
a daily
Cool.
basis.
Yeah, I mean that's great, and that reminds me a little bit of Fernand Badano, who is our general manager, has kind of the same
Yeah,
profile, and I know they know each other with Gerard, so that's kind of the same situation here. So, how would your parents or friends describe you? This is just for the audience to learn who is Anne.
so I think they would say I'm very energetic.
Okay.
I am usually I might be tired, right? I mean, I am tired very frequently, but still very energetic. I'm an optimistic person. I'm pretty enthusiastic about things. I mean, I have some moments where I'm down, of course, as anyone, and disappointed and angry, but it doesn't last very long. I get very energized by the things I like, work related or not work related. I always need to have, ongoing projects in my professional and personal life. I would say, there is this motto that we had at Monarchia from one of our investors. It's in French. It's exigence et bienveillance. In
Okay.
English, you would translate that by, being both very, I guess, demanding,
Hmm.
but also very caring in a way. And I apply that to myself a lot and to other people. So I would say that's a good description.
Okay, so energetic, optimistic, very active, demanding, and caring. That's who is Anne.
Exactly.
Great. Okay, so
Yeah.
let's move on to the space you're in with the Moon Surgical, which is laparoscopic surgery. I'm a very curious guy. I'm very much customer focused, so I like for each episode to understand what's the unmet needs in the space from a clinician's perspective. So let's start with the basics, the indication. Can you briefly explain what is a conventional laparoscopic surgery, how it is performed, what are the challenges that need to be solved today?
Sure. So laparoscopy is first the standard of care for soft tissue surgery. It has been the standard of care for the past, 30 years, maybe. It gradually replaced open surgery, and so the principle is that you're doing, what's called keyhole surgery. So you're essentially inserting long, thin surgical instruments into ports that are, created in the abdomen or in the thorax. And in these ports, you place trocars, which are little, conduits, basically, for laparoscopy instruments. And then the surgery is performed inside the abdomen, but the hands of the surgeon are outside of the abdomen, and you are following or able to see what's inside the abdomen using a camera that is also threaded through a hole, usually through the umbilicus. So, the benefits, of course, of laparoscopy surgery is that it's minimally invasive. This is why we're on this podcast.
Yeah.
But as you can imagine, it was a significant shift in the field, right, of soft tissue surgery, because the technique is completely different, the instrumentation is completely different, and the skill sets required are different. You have to now use very long instruments. You have to invert when you move it to the right, it goes on the left, etc. So you have to invert your movements. You have to see things on the screen versus directly. So it means that your eyes are looking up while your hands are operating down. So a lot of training and shifts for surgeons themselves, but also a profound transformation in the way the operating room is organized, because you need someone to basically hold the scope for the surgeon and control the vision of the surgeon and anticipate what the surgeon wants to see at any given time. And so this is typically done by a surgical assistant. And likewise, you need someone to hold, a grasper and lift the organs so that the surgeon can access the tissue of interest, right? Typically, you have to, navigate inside the abdomen to get to, the gallbladder or, the hernia that you need to repair, or the appendicitis location. So, this function of the surgical assistant really becomes pretty critical in laparoscopy surgery, because it's someone who, gets distributed with, the vision and the tissue exposure for the surgeon, and they have to work, basically hand in hand with the surgeon to provide that throughout the whole procedure, right, and anticipate the needs of the surgeon. So that has been one of the challenges of laparoscopy surgery over the years.
Okay, so I guess it requires a lot of communication between the surgeon and his assistant or her assistant.
Yeah, a lot of communication for sure, but also, a lot of, I think, physical optimization, because these two people sort of, want to have the same footprint, or ideally, if you want to understand what the surgeon would like to see, you have to place yourself in the location of the surgeon, but you're not there as the assistant. So they fight for the same workspace to some degree, there's a lot of assistant management in itself is a whole topic. You have surgeons telling you, when I have my good assistants, I know it's going to be a great day. When I have either a new team or a team I don't know, someone who's not familiar with me, or someone who just doesn't perform well as an assistant, I know it's going to be a lot more painful.
Okay, so what you explain, what I understand, is that there is the surgeon with the two instrument, there is one port for the endoscope, and there may be a fourth port for the grasper or the tissue exposure that you mentioned. Is it like every time 3 or 4? How much of those procedures are with 3 or 4 ports? Because I've been I posted recently a list of 20 multi-arm surgical robots, and maybe more than half of them have 4 arms, but some have still only 3 arms. So can you explain the difference?
So I would say, so the bulk of the laparoscopy procedures are 4-arm or 4 instruments, 4 trocars. And that would cover gallbladder removal, so cholecystectomy. It would cover a number of hernia repairs. It would cover appendectomies. So, these are the highest volume digestive surgery procedures. You can do some hernia repair procedures with 3 trocars. There's a lot of different hernias and techniques for hernia repair. So some of them can be done with 3 trocars. And then you have a number of laparoscopy procedures with 5 trocars, including oncology procedure. Also, some of the bariatric indications have 5 trocars. So 3, 4, and 5, with the kind of bread and butter procedures being mostly 4 trocars.
Okay, and do you know what percentage roughly of these laparoscopic procedures are performed in ambulatory surgery centers?
So that's a great question. It's it's a growing percentage for sure, because if you look at the most frequent procedures in the U.S., most frequent digestive surgery procedures, these would be cholecystectomies, hernia repairs, and appendectomies. To give you a order of magnitude, there's 800,000 gallbladder removals every year in the US, about the same
Okay.
number of appendectomies, and a higher number of hernia repairs. So it's very significant. And so these are non-oncological procedures. A number of them, the vast majority of them, are non-emergent procedures. Appendectomy is a bit different, but cholecystectomy and hernia repair are non-emergent procedures, usually pretty low-risk procedures, not necessarily with very old patients. So they can be done in a lighter setting, right?
Okay.
So either an ambulatory surgical center or a hospital outpatient department. And so hospitals are pushing really these simpler cases to these settings. And so it's very different, depending on the data you look at, but it's definitely a growing part of the market.
Okay, cool. So now I know a little bit more about laparoscopic surgery. Actually, that was the field I started working on and research on back in 2001 when I was involved in a project that was a teleoperated robot for endoscopic surgery. So I kind of know a little bit about hernia repair and fundoplication procedures, stuff like that, but just a little bit.
Yeah.
So now let's talk about the Maestro robot, because everyone is really curious in this industry as to what's this robot, and because this is not at all anything like the Da Vinci. So what does it look like, and what does it do exactly?
So Maestro is, what does it look like? It's a 2-arm robot. Those 2 arms can hold any laparoscopy instrument. Our first use case is that they would hold a scope and a retractor. So typically the 2 functions that a surgical assistant would do. But in theory, and also within our regulatory clearance, they can hold anything. And it's really taking a completely different approach versus other soft tissue robots, in the sense that we are operating next to the patient at the bedside, right? So we are essentially equipping the surgeon with an extra set of arms and hands and instruments, and giving the surgeon the complete control over all the instruments in that laparoscopy surgery. So that's very much like what a Da Vinci does, right? A Da Vinci gives control to the surgeon over all the instruments that are used in that surgery. But in doing that, the Da Vinci removes the surgeon from the center of the OR, and so that creates all sorts of complexities that essentially limit the adoption of Da Vinci for simpler, shorter surgical procedures, and for settings where efficiency is critical. So we've tried to take what surgeons like about robotics, which is the complete control, the super stable vision, the precision, but bring that really at the bedside in a way that wouldn't change the workflow in the OR, and that wouldn't change the surgical technique, the surgical instrumentation, and that would be very light to implement, if you will.
So I understand the surgeon pretty much operates the same way he's doing right now in conventional straight stick surgery. It just has these
Yeah.
2 arms. He's kind of snap the arm to the instrument after the port placement, and then
Exactly.
the robot is holding this the scope in a stable position, or the grasper to do tissue exposure and make sure that you have access to what you want to do in the anatomy, right?
Exactly. You place your ports, you place your instruments, and then you approach the robot. You attach the instruments, the scope and the grasper in that case, to the arms, and they hold them in place. And anytime you need to move them, you grab the scope, you move it. It's the arms will not resist. They will just follow very transparently what the surgeon is doing when moving the scope or the retractor. And as soon as the surgeon lets go, they lock in position and hold that position as long as desired, basically.
Okay, and in terms of so I think it's quite it looks quite straightforward. So in terms of setup, room layout, I mean it's not the same footprint obviously as the other systems. Is there a specific setup or specific layout that has to be respected for the use with Maestro?
So our working assumption was that our system should not be larger than a person, right? Than a
Wow.
human assistant.
Okay.
And it should be placed wherever the surgical assistant would be located. And so that's different based on the clinical indication. It's also different sometimes based on the geography. A gallbladder removal, for instance, is not done the same way in Europe and in the US. The surgeon is not in the same position relative to the patient. The ports are not in the same position. And the assistant is not in the same position as a result. So we wanted to have a platform that would be very adaptable, basically to any procedure needs. So you can just approach it typically where the assistant would stand, and take it from there.
Okay,
We're trying not to change anything.
yeah, I mean that's great because that means that you pretty much adapt to whatever specificities depending on countries, regions, and you do not say
Operating
okay
room,
for
even,
this
yeah.
procedure you have to place this port here, this one here, and this one here. You basically they do the same. They place the port at the same place. It's just that they have to put the robot in this place or the other depending on which configuration they use, right?
Exactly. Our first in human study investigator, Professor Guibert Arcadière, who is, a legend in our field, he told us, look, you're taking a different approach, but then you have to take it to the end, right? The platform has to adapt to me. I'm not adapting to the platform. And, we've kind of taken this to the extreme.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, we hear that a lot from surgeons and physicians, and it's not always easy to do so. Congrats.
No, no, no.
Okay, so you've talking about gallbladder removal procedures. What's the typical procedures the Maestro can help with, and what are the indications that you will target first? This is a question from David, a VC from Paris. Maybe you know him.
Yeah, so there's virtually no limit, right, in terms of which laparoscopy procedures we can address, and we've built a system for that, and we have an FDA clearance also that pretty much allows any laparoscopy procedure, whether it's even abdominal, thoracic, gynecologic, urologic, you name it. But to date, we have experience only in abdominal surgery clinically. And we've used our platform in 7 different clinical indications. We have removed a number of gallbladders. We have repaired hernias. We've done Nissen fundoplications. We've done bariatric surgery, gastric sleeve, gastric bypass. We recently did an anastomosis redo, which was kind of a random indication, but why not? So the system is very versatile and really allows for all these procedures and can be configured for the requirements of each one of these slightly differently. Our initial target is going to be these high volume abdominal procedures, so gallbladder, hernia, appendectomy, which is a market in the US, not in Europe or not in France, because people don't do appendectomies in France for other different reasons, I would say, and bariatric surgery, obviously.
Okay. In surgical robotics, there are some pushback from hospitals and surgeons about the cost per procedure due to the history of the main platform existing on the market. So they are quite sensitive to that. What's the disposable for the Maestro, and how does it work? How do you reprocess the equipment?
So that's a great question. So we don't provide any instrumentation, right? That's really important to understand. We use off-the-shelf laparoscopy instruments. Basically the instruments they would be using for that procedure if Maestro was not used. So we don't change anything there. But there are some disposables with our system, which are the drapes. We have a custom drape, of course, going on top of the system, and what we call the instrument couplers, which are used to. I have some here, actually. Just give me a second. Which are used to attach the instrument to the tip of our arms. This is like a 3D printed model, but
Okay.
this is an instrument coupler. And so you would typically have two, right? One on each arm, and these are disposables. So the disposable component is pretty minimal, and will be priced, in a very accessible way. I think you mentioned adaptability, which is clearly one of our keywords and one of our obsessions. The other one is accessibility. And accessibility really comes with the design of your product, of course, making sure it's super easy to use. It doesn't require extra training, but also making sure people can use it broadly, right? And making sure that from a business standpoint, it's a technology that can be acquired and utilized by settings which typically would not be able to afford a robot. And so we believe that a big piece of the innovation resides in the business model
Okay.
as well. And we believe that evolving the business model is actually a pretty central part of our approach. So we have a business model that is basically an all-inclusive monthly subscription based on volume. And so the disposables would be folded basically in that monthly subscription, so that people don't have to worry about it. Simplicity is not only intra-procedural, it's also procurement, it's also training. There's a lot of areas where you can improve things from a simplicity standpoint.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we are seeing more and more of these subscription models in the robotic space, and other assistive technologies such as augmented reality to help with the procedure. So I got a question from a US surgeon, Dr. McMahon. What have been the surgeon's feedbacks on the integration into the existing workflow?
Very good question. Feedback has been pretty overwhelmingly positive. So to be perfectly transparent, we have not done a clinical case in the US yet, right? Our clinical experience has only been in Europe to date, but we've done a lot of cadaver labs, and we've brought a lot of US surgeons and nurses into these cadaver labs. And the feedback is, they first they think that our system is very easy to use, right? Learning curve of one case. Basically, you get them in, you train them during 10, 15 minutes, and they're ready to go, which makes sense, right? We're not really changing anything. The additional thing they have to manage is the scope and the retractor, but the interaction with our system is very simple, right? There's no button, there's no clutch, there's no pedal. You just grab the scope, you move it, you let it go. So there's nothing really to learn, except the understanding how we communicate the status of the system to the surgeon, right, to make sure it's locked or unlocked, etc. So they think it's very easy to use. They tell us that it's according to them, very appropriate for these bread and butter procedures. But I think the most powerful is, we've had feedbacks like, you've turned laparoscopy to an absolute joy. They think it's fun actually using our system. They think it's they like the confidence it gives them, and they tell us, hey, if I'm in charge of all that, the scope and the retractor, I'm going to be, shaving off a few minutes from every cholecystectomy or every hernia repair, right? Because, I know what my needs are. I can really only move the scope and the retractor when I need them to be moved, which means far less than they would require an assistant to move it. When an assistant is holding their vision, the surgeons are anxious, or they're concerned when the instruments get to the tip of the screen, right? And so they don't have a very good tolerance for that. So they'll constantly ask the assistant to reposition, right? And the assistant is constantly repositioning during the procedure. But when they work on their own and they know the system is perfectly stable and solid and holds the scope in position, they can tolerate working on the edges of their laparoscopy screen a lot more. So they don't have to move it that much. And that's pretty easy to measure. So, it's one of the beauties, and that's why they'll tell us, I feel so powerful, I feel so efficient, and the last piece, and that's really from our clinical investigator who's used the system for, whole procedure days where he did 5 cases in a row using our system, is that he feels a lot less fatigued at the end of the day. He's had his family tell this to him when he goes home. And I think it relates again to, just the simplicity and having to manage fewer things in the OR and have it a little more streamlined workflow, basically, than the traditional workflow.
So from what I understand, part of the value proposition is also to do not need one surgical assistant during the procedure, or correct?
That's correct. We think, I think the way we put it is we are enabling alternative labor models. I think what we want to say by that is, of course, you can have, one, fewer headcount. Someone doesn't need to be in the room. I don't know how, hospitals and ASCs will implement this exactly. I think that's, it's yet to be seen. I don't think the surgical assistants will entirely disappear with our system. There are still, some procedures, there are 5 trocar procedures, right, where you still need an assistant. There are some emergent procedures where you might not feel comfortable not having an assistant. But I think the reality today is that a lot of operating rooms are not properly staffed. And so for a number of these, straightforward cases, you can imagine performing them without a surgical assistant in the room, and you can basically enable that operating room to be, delivering throughputs with limited staff requirements. So I think it's a way for hospitals and ASCs to have more agility in the way they deploy their existing staff, for sure.
Okay, understood. So I will come back to a more technical question. I think this is coming from Robin from North Carolina. So you explained that basically you snap the robotic arm to the instrument, and then you move it, and then when you remove, the device knows that you don't want it to move anymore, and it just stabilizes the position. So how does this gravity compensation works? Not confidential information, and do you have any kind of a calibration phase, because you could be handling different kind of instrument, all sorts of laparoscopic instruments, so maybe they do not have the same weight. Is there any kind of calibration, or is it just ready to go?
So I'll start with the first question, right? The gravity compensation. So our arms themselves are, initially or originally haptics input devices, right? That's what they're used for. They're used as a joystick, basically, typically to control another robotic arm, right?
Okay.
The initial use case is maintenance of nuclear plants, right? That's what they were developed for. So to replicate very fine movements from the operator, in a telemanipulation scheme. So we've kind of turned that around, and so we're using them as the effector, but it means that we're constantly measuring, the forces, the positions, the movements, anything that is applied on the instrument held by the arm, right? So we're measuring all these efforts, and of course, we're able to compensate for them, using software, basically.
Okay.
And so that's how the gravity compensation works. It's completely, dynamic, to the point that, we really, it's not only that we replicate the laparoscopy experience, we can replicate the laparoscopy experience without the gravity, right? So making it even lighter for
Okay.
surgeons to maneuver their instruments. And then your second question was on calibration. So when you attach the instrument, we need a very short sampling, basically, a few thousands of data points, moving the instrument to understand what instrument it is and calibrate the system.
Okay, so that's
So I think
very short.
it's completely transparent for the user. That basically by the time they, move their instrument in the trocar, we have everything we need.
Okay, so I had other questions, but I think you already answered them about the training. So the training seems to be very short, like a couple of cases, because just you operate the same way you did before. And the learning
Exactly.
curve, how long is the learning curve?
So, we have, some clinical experience, but, limited in terms of number of surgeons. But from what we've seen in the clinic and on cadavers, there is a learning curve. I mean, of course, people get just more and more comfortable using the system, but it's extremely short, right? It's less than 10 patients. We saw what was interesting to us when we started our clinical study was we started by doing only cholecystectomies. We then broadened it to additional clinical indications, and over the first 10 cholecystectomies, we saw a pretty dramatic reduction in the procedure duration. I'm not saying the first procedures were long. I mean, the first procedures were, an hour. I mean, nothing compared to the 8 hours that the first cholecystectomy with Da Vinci took, right? It was very, very manageable. But at the end, we were doing cholecystectomies in 17 minutes, which is probably even faster than they would do without the use of our system. So yeah, for sure, people, I think, as they understand the value and the way to use our system, will leverage it and optimize the duration of the procedure. I think that's where we're going to see, most of the learning curve kicking in.
Okay, cool. So I had a question from someone who actually went to the show, Dr. Jawad Ali, who is a general surgeon in Texas, and he was asking how the Maestro is set up to penetrate the ASC market, since Intuitive seems to be struggling. I think you answered pretty much this one with the subscription model, but do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, I do, because I think, a lot, as I was mentioning before, it's really twofold, right? There's the product design, and the obsession of doing something simple is, as not simple, right? It's probably the most difficult thing to do in R&D, is to do something simple and completely seamless, and to make sure you don't satisfy yourself by putting too sophisticated things into your system. I mean, it's great, right, for your R&D team to think about all the, very elaborate things that could go in, but that's really not the point. The point is it has to be super elaborate inside, but super easy from the outside. And that is really one of our obsessions. How can we remove this button but keep the functionality? And so we've been through that a lot, and so when it comes to product design, I think we have a special attention to what happens in the procedure, of course, but we have also a very strong focus on what happens outside of the procedure. And I'll give you an example. Our commercial product has a feature which automates the setup of the system. So you basically bring the system close to the bed. There's something that tells you, hey, stop here, you're close enough. And then you hit cholecystectomy, and then based on the room setup, the bed angle, the surgeon height, the way the surgeon has done his previous cases, the system by itself does that and puts the arms, in the optimal position for that surgeon, for that indication, for that room, and for that patient, of course. And so, that's all part of, creating a system that can be used in an ASC, right? Because you don't want to overburden your staff with the setup and the docking of the system, which, we all know is one of the major pain points with some of the other platforms. So product design is definitely, a central piece of integrating ourselves into the ASCs, and then the other piece is the business model, as we discussed.
Okay, I'm very excited about this automation question, but first, just before, I will try to ask a couple of questions about the differentiator with today there are more than 150, maybe 200 surgical robotics companies out there, and probably 40 to 50 who are only targeting soft tissue surgery, so
Yeah.
either single port, multi-port, or a natural orifice approach. So when it comes to mechanical capabilities, because I understand your device is very simple to use and very quick to learn and to bring to an existing workflow. The Da Vinci on the other side, they brought advanced technology like the wristed instrument, the 3D
Yeah.
vision. I think your device still provides some kind of a tremor filtering, control of the camera, stability of the instrument. How do you think your surgeons will react to not having this advanced wristed instrument, for instance, or the 3D vision?
Yeah. The 3D vision, I mean, you can get, right? You just use
Yeah.
a 3D
Okay.
camera, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's not an issue. The wristed instrument is a really, really good question. And so our initial answer was, hey, there are wristed laparoscopy instruments. We just have to be compatible with them. They're not, they're not used a lot, but some of them, have probably the right capabilities. And if we can integrate them, or make sure they're compatible with our platform, then we can really deliver the best of both worlds, right? To surgeons. And that's clearly one of the directions we want to go with. But when we were doing clinical cases a few months ago, we had a case where it was a gallbladder removal, and the surgeon went in, and there were basically adhesions everywhere in the abdomen because the patient had multiple surgeries before. And so we were going in for a 15-minute case, and he said, oh no, this is going to be like a 2 or 3 hour procedure just to get to the gallbladder. And he actually used our system for this whole time, and told us, with basically the stability of the system and the ability to control it and to approach the camera really from the location he was dissecting, with a lot of ease of navigation.
Yeah.
At the end of the procedure, he told us, I was really doing microsurgery here, and the stability and the confidence you're providing me basically compensate for
Okay.
the absence of a wristed instrument. And we've had that in another cholecystectomy case where we had to ligate things because it was like not the typical anatomy, and so they had to do a lot of suturing before they could take the gallbladder out. We got the same comments. So I'm not saying it's equivalent to a wristed instrument. I'm saying there are other ways basically to provide the comfort that a surgeon needs to do a proper suture in a laparoscopy procedure. And I think we can deliver that to some extent. So, a mix of both, probably compatibility with wristed instruments, and then facilitating the life of the surgeon with everything else, so that they can do, a better job at suturing with their regular instruments.
Okay. Yeah. Plus they keep the haptic feedback since they are manipulating the instrument
Absolutely.
itself. So
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
a big difference. And yeah, that resonates with another episode I've done with pelvic reconstructive surgeon, Dr. Paula Doyle, she was mentioning that she was using fluorescence imaging as a compensation for not having the haptic feedbacks in the Da Vinci system.
Yeah.
So I understand there are ways to do differently, but still be confident in performing the same surgical task
Mhm.
in a different way. Great. So now I'm moving on to the AI and the data